All right, from the streets of London at dusk, here goes the second Rousseau video. So what I want to talk about in this one is the difference between the private will, the general will, and the common good, and a little bit about the role of the legislator. Here we are on the canal, by the way. So everybody has a private will. In other words, a will is simply what you want, and when you make a decision, you express it, that is your will. We call it a private or individual will because it's your own. Remember that as citizens, you become part of the sovereign, and you become part of the voting body, the collective body that is the sovereign, right? So the sovereign has its own will. In the discussion, one of the discussions, there's this question of how is the sovereign a collective body modeled off the individual? So it's modeled off it in this way. If individuals have private wills, then the collective body has its own general will. So when people vote, they express a general will. And, you know, as I was saying before, if there's something up for a vote, people take a vote on it. A simple majority decides, and whatever the majority decides, that is the general will. So the general will is just another term for the collective body, right? So, I don't know if that guy was cussing at me. Now, the general will should aim toward the common good. The common good is what we want society to proceed toward. The common good is what is actually in everybody's best interest as a collective. Now, people may vote a certain way. Dog just jumped in the water and it kind of scared me. People may vote a certain way, and that the way they vote may or may not proceed toward the general will. Rousseau says that ideally it would. The general will would ideally proceed toward the common good. The common good being what is in everybody's best collective interest as a collective body. So, how do we know what the common good is? How do we know what really is in everybody's best self-interest? Do people know? People may have certain preferences, you know, and you can make a decision that is what you want, but just because it's what you want doesn't necessarily mean it's actually what's best for you. And as a collective body, as a society, as a sovereign, we may collectively, you know, decide one thing, and it is the result of the collective vote of the general will, but it may not be what is in everybody's best collective interest. So this creates a problem for Rousseau. And the problem is, excuse me, I'm trying to get used to walking on the left side of the road, but it's near the water and I'm holding the stick and I don't want to fall in like the dog. So this creates a problem. And Rousseau solves it by appealing to what's called the legislator. Now the legislator is a person, or it could be a few people, and they are the ones that propose laws. And the laws that they propose should aim toward the common good. Should aim toward the common good. Now, who are the legislators? They're supposed to have three characteristics. They are wise and rational, they are moral, and they are knowledgeable of what the common good is. They are knowledgeable of what is in everybody's collective self-interest. Now, in our voting system, Congress people not only propose laws, but they also vote on those laws. And the key difference in Rousseau's system is that the legislators only propose the laws. They do not enact those laws. Now, insofar as they are citizens, they have a right to vote like everybody else. But as we know through our system, congressmen, senators not only have their right to vote as individual citizens, they have special voting rights insofar as they are senators. And that's not really the case in Rousseau's system. So the job of the legislator the legislator or legislators, it could be singular or plural, it could really, by the way, the kind of society Rousseau is talking about differs from our American society insofar as we're kind of unusual in that we are this really big collection of 50 states that has cultural diversity, and most other countries aren't really like that. Most other countries like England or France are smaller, and so if you're wondering how do we all come to decide what's best for everybody, the model he's looking at is, a smaller state model rather than like the nation state, which is what we're used to. So the legislator is wise, moral, and knows the common good. He or she proposes laws, and then everybody who's part of the sovereign, that is every citizen, has the right to vote on them. Now, it's the legislator's job to not only propose laws, but to basically sell them and to say why they're in everybody's collective self-interest. And if the legislator is persuasive and good at what they're doing, then they can persuade people to vote on behalf of those laws. And if they're not so great at selling it, maybe their law won't get passed, right? So you can imagine the legislator has some law in mind, says, here is why we need the law, here is what the law is going to do, and here's why you should, vote it into law. And if the legislator is good, then people will follow their lead. Now, Rousseau entertains the following problem. What happens if the legislator has a law that he wants to see passed, and despite his good effort to try to sell the law, people don't vote it in? And he knows in his heart of hearts, in his mind of minds, that this law really is what's in everybody's best collective interest. But, people sometimes don't make the right decision. So what to do in that situation? Rousseau says this. I think you'll find this interesting. Rousseau says that the legislator can make what he calls a noble falsehood, which is to say that the legislator can lie, but the legislator can only tell one very specific kind of lie. And that lie is simply that God endorses the law that they are entertaining. And because people often feel like if God is on the side of the law, then they have more reason to enact it. So the legislator can lie, but only tell one specific kind of lie, that is, that God endorses this law. He can't lie about any other aspect about the law. And the other caveat is that the law really has to be in everybody's collective self-interest. It can't be motivated on what we might call bad faith. There has to be a good faith effort that the law really does what the legislator thinks it's going to do. So, what do you think about this? Okay, so the only thing that justifies it again is that the law really is in everybody's collective self-interest. And all the legislator can say is that God endorses this law. I'm trying to figure out where I am. Okay. So, this gives the legislator a lot of power, no doubt, but the power is checked by the caveats and the conditions of what I just described. Most importantly, that the law really has to be in everybody's collective self-interest. So, the legislator can say God endorses this law in order to additionally motivate people to vote for that law. And Rousseau thinks this is allowable only under these particular conditions. So, think that about wraps up what I wanted to talk about, which again was the difference between a private will and the general will, the common good, what the role of the legislator is, and this idea of the noble falsehood. 4 key ideas. So what you should think about is, would you agree with Rousseau's claim that there are certain conditions in which the legislator can lie to the public, this noble falsehood, even if it meets these specific conditions? Or do you think that in some way that is sort of like alienating power, the very thing that Rousseau said he didn't want to see happen to the sovereign in the last video, that the sovereign's power, which again is everybody is part of the sovereign, is inalienable, indivisible, and can't be represented. Is it alienating, which is to say separating some of our freedom or power by giving the legislator this special privilege? Or do you think that, take a look around, it's not the case that, so Rousseau kind of recognizes this, that ideally we want a democracy, but the most central problem with democracy is that the masses don't always choose what's best for them. So in some sense there's like a check, there needs to be some kind of check on the masses, because, think about laws like, think about our history of slavery or gender inequality, racial inequality. If the question of slavery, for example, was left up to a vote, it might not have gotten abolished, because sometimes leaders, and this is where we have leaders, have to lead the way and the masses will follow. So some things, some people say, are not always best left up for the masses to decide. We need certain people who are maybe smarter than the masses, more knowledgeable of the masses, maybe even more moral than most people, in order to direct the masses toward the common good. All right, I apologize for the low quality of the last video. I don't know why it came out at 240. I watched it and it looked really crappy. I uploaded it the same way I normally do. Maybe I have a bad transatlantic connection. But all right, we'll see you next time for the next video. Cheers.